Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
At what point does the what somebody collects become less interesting than the why somebody collects? And if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you're in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and we pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in a light and conversational fashion. And if you like how we do things around here, I'm going to assume that you do because you're listening to us right now. You can subscribe to the podcast. You can find us over at Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google, basically wherever you get your podcasts. And plus, we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel. So if you can give us a like and subscribe there as well, we'd really appreciate it. Also, don't hesitate to find us on the social media. You can find us on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram at either @InTheSeats or at It's Podcast One for all sorts of fun updates. And finally, and I do dare say most importantly, please pay us a visit over at In The Seats, intheseats.ca for all the latest and greatest in the world of film, television, basically the moving image at large, because if we love to write about it and talk about it, we love it when you come by and read about it and listen about it. So please pay us a visit. On this episode, we got an interesting one. It's sort of a timely one, given the Batman fever that is out there in the ether right now. It is a documentary, and it is called Batman and Me from director Michael Wayne. And it's the story of Darren Maxwell, who became addicted to collecting Batman merchandise in the late 1980s Australia as a way to be part of the sort of nascent geek culture. Decades later, Darren's stuck in a room full of collectibles and an identity that he doesn't recognize anymore. He has a supportive partner and a fanboy best friend, and a persistent need to belong, but he's not able to let go of it all either. And he's kind of lost focus on the why of why he's been collecting. And this one spoke to me on a real interesting level because as a collector and a fan of movies, as I'm sure you can imagine, I'm a bit of a movie buff. I'm a movie guy. I have shelves and shelves of DVDs and Blu-rays and so on and so forth. But it really dives into sort of the psyche of collecting and how it can get a little obsessive and get a little out of control. And it's an interesting little character study that Michael's put together. And we had the distinct opportunity of talking with Michael Wayne over Zoom about sort of the origins of the film and how he met Darren and just sort of diving into all this. And it makes for a really interesting talk, which I hope you enjoy, but also don't hesitate to get out there and look for Batman and Me, which is on, all your favorite video-on-demand platforms as we speak. So check it out because, check out the film and check out our talk right now because it's a good one.
All right. Well, first off, obviously, just thank you so much for the time today. I appreciate it.
No, thanks for having me on. It's great to be here.
Now, congratulations on the movie because, I got to admit, I am a fellow sufferer when it comes to collecting things. Walk me through, I guess, on your end, sort of the origin of the story, and I guess maybe why the fixation on Batman, because to me, that's almost the most interesting part of the thing, because it could have been anything, but it was very specifically Batman.
Well, that's right. It could have been anything, and if it was about a guy who was collecting spoons, I don't think it'd be as interesting. I just don't think the public would care. The Batman angle was really, when you walked into this guy's room and it was so colorful and his bat stuff was everywhere, it was just sort of overwhelming. And it is sort of funny, the versatility of the character of Batman, the amount of stuff they'll put him on. And I think in the movie we're talking about Batman's sunscreen at some point. Like, yeah, okay, there's the character least likely to use sunscreen ever in all of pop culture history. Okay, sunscreen, sure. And I think it's just the breadth of stuff. I think only Star Wars would be on more merchandise than Batman. But for me, it was, I was a kid when the Michael Keaton film, the first one came out. And
for sure,
I loved that. Can I ask how old are you?
Oh, I'm 44, so I was 12 when it came out. So
Yeah, so we'd be in the same kind of it just was everywhere, and you couldn't really avoid it at school. That was just all everyone was about, and they were clever in the way that they released further ones to keep your interest going all the way up until the Clooney movie. But when I found Darren's website, Darren had been collecting at that time, and he'd set up a website where he'd profiled his collection, but he didn't have any kind of passion for it. He was putting this stuff up, putting up photos of the stuff he had, saying, yeah, but I mean, who cares? It's just junk anyway, isn't it? I thought that's just so different. You're so used to seeing collectors showing it off and passionate about it and celebrating it, and that's fine. But no one had ever really explored this side of it before. And I thought that Darren and his Batman collection was the best way to be able to do that.
No, I mean, was Darren on board from minute one, or did this take a little bit of talking into on your end?
Well, I was lucky in that Darren had been a short filmmaker himself. He'd made films. He was across all that. So I think some people are like, oh, filmmaker, oh, no, I don't want to, I don't know what that's going to involve, but he was across it all. So he was fine with it. And he straight away, he was just like, yeah, it sounds good. Come down and check it out. And I'm in Sydney and he's in Melbourne. So that's an hour and a half on a plane, but a 10-hour drive. So it wasn't sort of I could just duck around the corner and check it out. But I went down there and he was very welcoming. It was just like, yeah, go in there, have a look. And it felt to me like he'd barely gone in there. And I found out later that, yeah, it wasn't of interest to him at all. It was just a curio for guests, and that was about it. And even then, he wasn't sort of in the habit of showing it off.
I kind of love how your film really tackles the idea that, I mean, even Darren himself kind of admits that it's an impulse and almost a disease, really, in many ways. Like, were you kind of struck by just how, I guess, a matter of fact he was about just sort of his relationship to the collection? Because, I mean, obviously he had ebbs and flows, but I was definitely I understood, but I was also taken back by his sort of acceptance of maybe part of this isn't giving me joy anymore, if that makes any kind of sense.
Well, I was, as we worked on it, I started to wonder if it had ever given him any joy. And I wondered, it was important to me to find out where that joy had ever come from, if it had been there at any time. And because I mean, at first I sort of went there with good intentions. We were walking around in the room and I was saying, so do you remember getting this? And it'd be something that I had, and I'd be like, oh, this meant everything to me. I remember having that. I loved that. What was it like for you, fellow enthusiast, to get this? And what was it like? And he just sort of look at it and go, I don't even remember buying that. I don't remember that. I bought it and I put it in here and I walked away. And that became sort of a common explanation for any of it. So where he was expecting a fantastic story behind everything he had, but the story became, I bought it because I had to, I put it in here, I forgot about it, got on with the next thing. And it was so devoid of any kind of enthusiasm. For me, that became the interesting point and something to pursue.
Where do you think sort of the break happens between sort of the fandom versus the obsession? Because, I mean, obviously you go into fandom culture a little bit in the film, but I'm always curious to see where sort of that shift is, because, I mean, obviously there are people who will be involved with it and collect stuff and do this because they love it and it brings them joy. But then there is that other shift where it's like, I've got to have all the numbers of the spine lined up in a row perfectly, or it's not complete. It's not, it's not going to define who I am if I don't have, everything lined up perfectly.
I think that it comes from expectations in the community. I think that once you've become a part of that community, unless you're collecting for yourself, in which case it's all your own doing, and you sculpt it to have it your way, and that's on you. But if you're, as Darren was, doing it to be a part of the community that he was in, the fan community, I think he had expectations around him that were, you have to have new stuff every time someone comes around. You've got to have it arranged in this way. I mean, he said he put a few rules on it for his own, I suppose, financial security. He only collected just Batman. He didn't get Robin or Joker stuff, anything like that. But it wasn't really down to taste. It was just sort of about, doing what he thought was expected of him. And I thought that was interesting.
And that is interesting because, I mean, it's interesting to see sort of like sort of the emotional and psychological progression of fandom, because I mean, on one end, when we're kids, we're diving into it, it's everywhere, we're obsessed, we've got to sort of keep up with it to sort of be a part of the community. But at some point we have that break, and I mean, I think you even referenced it in the film with sort of him breaking out of the package and then not really breaking out of the package. And I mean, it's kind of a fascinating thing to see. And I mean, as you were sort of filming and meeting with him like again and again and again, like were you sort of conscious of where the story was going to go, or were you just having to sort of let it play out?
We did have to let it play out to an extent, but I think that once it became clear that I would talk to him a little bit about Batman, the character, and the IP in general, and he didn't really have anything to say about it. And you'd hear it and think, geez, like you don't, if you were that into it, surely you'd know like what Commissioner Gordon was all about, or
Right. Yeah.
things like that. But he didn't. And I said, what's that about? Like his thing was Star Wars. He was always a big Star Wars fan. He actually is one of the co-founders of Australia's biggest Star Wars fan club, and I think it's the oldest Star Wars fan club in the world at this point. And that did make it easy in some ways. When we were making the film, we had to get some permissions, and that his connections in that world made it easier to do. Yeah. But Batman, it was big at the time. None of his friends were doing it, so he didn't have to compete against anyone. And for him, that was all the green light he needed to get on with it. And yeah, I think what I wanted to do with this was get people thinking about why they collect and why other people collect. And this guy's reasons never really added up to me. So it was always, it really developed into, have a look at this guy, have a look at what he's doing, think about what you're doing and the people in your community. And you know, it's not all about, this is my passion and this is a way to express my passion. It's not like that for everyone.
No, for sure. But I mean, the issues around community as well that the film brings up are definitely relevant as well, because I mean, it is like fandom in and of itself is a community, and I mean, it's an important thing as well. And I mean, I'm just curious, like as you were sort of getting into it and even talking to other people, like was he an outlier in the community, or was he sort of generally accepted? Because I mean, I see what he's done, and I mean, I understand it, but then at the same time, I don't, because like you said, if you're collecting all this Batman stuff, you're going to know who Commissioner Gordon is.
I don't know if he was an outlier, but what I think, and I could be wrong, I think that the community that he was in had become an outlier in the greater fandom, if you know what I mean. Like, he had started in this community here, and especially that it's Australian, which back in the 80s, it wasn't as connected to fandom in America as it is now. We didn't have all these pop culture shows all the time. It was its own thing, developing in its own way. He was a big part of that. But I think as fandom became more connected around the world, his group was sort of like, no, we're doing our own thing. We're good. We're just going to be our own thing. And I think that became the outlier. So he was an identity within that. But that had sort of, I don't want to say out of touch with the rest of fandom, but it wasn't keeping up with where fandom was. And that's where we try to go there in the movie as well, to explore where he feels like he's out of step with everything else.
No, and I mean, it brings up an interesting point, how wanting to be an outlier in this very unique community can sort of be an identity in and of itself. And I mean, I think you really show that in the film very well. But I mean, something else I've got to ask is, because I mean, obviously when you're doing a documentary about pop culture, I've got to imagine clearing things is going to be a nightmare. Like, how was it for you to sort of get clearance to be able to show a lot of this stuff?
Oh, look, we went into it thinking, oh, yeah, we'll just film that and not give it any second thought. And we did it all, and we got to the end of it, and it wasn't until we were in the distribution, the early stages of that process, that it came up. And, yeah, I spent a lot of time with fair use and fair dealing lawyers to work out what was good and what wasn't. It would come up in funny ways. We could use the stuff in his room, but there were some things that were harder to do. We had a poster the original version of the poster, I got a friend to do the illustration of the poster in a comic kind of style, and it had Batman on it in an obscure kind of way. Like, you knew who it was, but it wasn't a clear image of him, and it didn't have the logo, and that's really the contentious point. But even then, the lawyers said, "Look, there's too much of Batman in there. There's too much of Batman's ass. You got to cut that down." So we had to change it from, we had to censor Batman.
Copyright.
Yeah, yeah, we had to change it just from too much of his ass to just his hand. That was better. So it was strange. Compromises like that had to be made, but the laws are. If we'd made the film in the US, it would have been a lot easier to do than here. In Australia, the laws are a bit stricter around that kind of stuff, so it was harder than it needed to be at times, but we got there in the end.
To me, in watching this film, this really was sort of a very interesting comedy, and not comedy, but commentary on sort of the nature of fandom and how it can get away from people. I'm kind of curious, now that you're at the tail end of it, how do you think the film plays just in terms of understanding fandom and understanding the psychology behind it?
Well, we didn't want to profess to be speaking for all fandom.
Right.
Early on, we were. It's this guy's story. It's a unique story within fandom, but we did have to give it a bit of greater context. We did have to take it a bit wider. We went to pop culture fairs and expos and stuff like that. We talked to other people, other collectors, other cosplayers, because when you go to these conventions, cosplay is the main thing. People aren't walking around sort of with photos of collections on their phones showing that off. The cosplay is the easiest way to do it, and it's fun. I think maybe more fun than collecting for some people. So it was. We didn't want to tar all of fandom with this guy could happen to you, like this guy's story could happen to you. It was more. We can celebrate collecting and being a fan, but just think about the reasons why you're doing it, because not everyone does it for the right reasons, and that was the case we found with Darren.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and I think it's an important thing to put out there. And I mean, this is something I got to ask, and it's a silly one, but what is your fandom? What got you into this business in general to make films?
I just love movies. I I love movies. We made a few shorts in the past, but this was the first feature we did. And we were going to do it as a short, but there was just, we felt that there was enough of a story there to justify the length, and we were able to keep exploring it. And then eventually it got out to the length that it is now, which is feature length. I like Batman, but I didn't take it to the extremes that Darren did, even though he didn't really like it at all. So I don't know. Maybe if I'd liked it less, I would have been doing things his way.
Well, and it's interesting, yeah. No, but I mean, it's interesting because, I mean, Darren was collecting Batman, but he was collecting very specific Batman. There wasn't necessarily about the Nolan or the other stuff. It was just this specific window of Batman.
Yeah, and he was always careful to have opinions on the latest stuff. He'd say, yeah, I've seen the Nolan movies, and The Dark Knight was really good, stuff like that, to make it seem like he did care. But I did get the feeling that he couldn't have cared less, and Star Wars was really where his heart was at, and that was what he was concentrating on.
All right, well, I guess just to start putting a bow on this, at the end of the day, what do you hope audiences pull from this? Because, I mean, obviously, in the pop culture universe that we're living in right now, Batman is once again controlling all of our lives. But I'm kind of curious, like, what is your takeaway? What do you hope audiences take away from this story of, I don't want to say, like, because his fandom isn't necessarily bad or it's good. It's just an examination of one very specific story. Like, what do you hope people take away from it?
Well, you make a good point there. It's not bad or good, and I hope that comes across in the film. I hope that it does come across as neutral, because we didn't want to judge him. We just wanted to look at it and go, like, but what are you doing, and how is it done? And wondered, I just always wondered if he'd asked himself those questions. So I think that what I'd like is that audiences will watch this and come away asking themselves questions about their own fandom, questions about, if they're not fans, asking themselves questions about the fans in their lives. If maybe it's parents watching this movie and their kids are into this stuff, having a bit of a better understanding about why people are into this stuff and how it can work in their lives. I do think that it's been a pretty one-sided conversation, the fandom conversation, as it's built up over the years. It's all positive. This is a great thing, and it's an expression of what we love. I think it was time to have this counterpoint in the conversation as well and say, but it's not that it's bad, but it's let's have a look at what we're doing and how it can manifest itself.
No, and I mean, you're right. Objectively, Batman could have been spoons at the end of the day, but it definitely makes for an interesting study and an interesting character study as well. And I think you've done a great job with that. And just thanks for the time today, man. And again, congratulations on the film.
No, thanks for having me on. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.